And Leanne, is it?
Sorry, so in line with the committee structure adopted this morning, those are the first of the meetings to be held before the end of this year, and if it's the wish of council to add any committee meetings before the end of the year, then you'll have to let me know and we will adjust the schedule accordingly.
Councillor?
This has been a bit of an issue for me over the last 3 years, that dates were just simply sort of set, or meetings were set up and just populated in my diary. I'd like us to have a process which continues with this, that before things are set up, that they come to the council for approval on the time and the content. And secondly, I'd like an operating process that we prefer, if it's going to be council meetings on Wednesdays, the Wednesdays are the preferred meetings for all of our preferred days for all of the meetings. So people get used to blocking out a Wednesday. If it's not to be a Wednesday, we then have a default position, which is either Tuesday or Thursday. You know what I mean? So people can manage their diaries, and so that you know that if you're going to be doing things in the future, you know that Wednesdays are council days, Tuesdays are council days, and you can be reasonably okay that Mondays or Fridays can be used for other things. Otherwise, you can't operate. So I just like to have a bit of understand that's what we're going to do, one way or the other.
Discussion on that.
Yeah. So
Not an understanding, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Discussion, yeah. Good to clarify that. Debbie?
So I had the 16th of November for regional planning. Has that been canned now?
The Regional Planning Committee was initially, what do you call it? Provisionally scheduled for the 16th of November, but what's happening on that day now is the Regional Planning Committee wānanga that all councillors have been invited to, and all Regional Planning Committee, that's at the Tata Whenua offices, and then in order to accommodate...
Tata Whenua Hastings?
Yes. In order to accommodate still having a meeting fairly quickly, we've tentatively scheduled the 23rd of November as the Regional Planning Committee meeting day.
So the 16th's not a workshop or anything, it's just a voluntary day?
No, it's a workshop.
So it's effectively workshops. The purpose of the 16th is to have a discussion about the terms of reference between the Tangata Whenua representatives and councillors, and to also hear from the independent advisors to the Tangata Whenua reps around the obligations that exist under the RMA for council working with Tangata Whenua, and also to hear from each of the treaty settlement groups about their settlements and their obligations that arise from that. So it's an opportunity for the councillors and the Tangata Whenua reps to get some shared understanding about the purpose and function of the committee.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other workshops that should be noted in here too? No. Thank you.
Sorry, can we just go back to that? So, time and place?
16th, Tita Whenua, Heratonga,
At?
Dunamahu Road.
At 10 a.m. is the
10
start
a.m.
time.
Yeah, 10 a.m.
Is it? No, 9 a.m.? 10. Yeah, it is 10.
I'd like some discussion around what Councillor Barker's put on, because I have a lot of sympathy with his position, because I'm busy like the rest of you, and this is not a full-time job, of course, for anybody. This is a governance job, and we all got families and planning, and he especially has an incredible role, which I'm very proud of, what he does for the nation in terms of his treaty, and he needs to do that for a little while longer. So if I like the idea of Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, that I can say that's definite out of my diary. I can do things for council on those days, and I know that, and also I can plan over the weekend. So just a personal thing. But if we know that those are the days, we can plan for it, and then Thursdays and Fridays if you're doing something else. So I don't know if there's a consensus on that we can sort of fix the first part of the week for all the meetings.
Mr. Chair,
It's worked up till now, pretty much like that. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I wonder whether I could throw in another angle that we perhaps also discuss in regard to the meetings, is that whereas it's fine and we've got a wonderful turnout of the public today, I think we could double our numbers if we were to hold meetings perhaps in the afternoon and into the evening, or even on a Saturday morning perhaps, so that people that are actually in employment and working could potentially attend as well. Is that something we ought to be considering in terms of making this council much more accessible? I know there's a lot of wealthy people here today that attend, but
They're all on the pension. Yeah, I'm fortunate I get the old age pension. So. But I wouldn't support that personally, but they may get some support around the table. So what we've got is, perhaps this is something we can discuss at a workshop too. So we've got Barker and Graham saying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays. We've got Curtin saying perhaps we could go into the evening and perhaps we could do Saturday morning. Those of us with kids playing Saturday morning sport would find that a little bit difficult, but so be it. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think
yes.
we've got to be a bit careful about this workshop idea. I mean, it's not very long ago that certain councillors were voicing their concerns about transparency and the need to do business in public, and the editor of our worthy paper believes that we should not do stuff behind closed doors. I don't agree with them on that. As long as we obey the law, then that's fine. But I don't think we should be trying to pile too much into this such a closed doors discussion.
I 100% agree with that. I just don't want to bore the public on everyone's views on these issues. But if you want to move, I mean, currently we do Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. I think that's I've sort of noticed. So that's a format which we've used quite successfully. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
So am I. So we don't need a motion to say that. We'll just keep the same format. Yes. In this paper, certainly can.
If I could use a aircraft analogy, you could picture in your head a jet taking off a aircraft carrier, and it's catapulted out there, and it gains altitude quickly, and it all happens pretty quickly, and it's all about real business. And then you have the sort of 747 cargo jet taking off a 3-mile runway. We seem to be about 200 meters down our runway. My environment committee hasn't met in months. Your environment committee hasn't met in months. Under this schedule, it's not going to meet probably till February. I thought it was an important committee. I also thought the corporate committee was an important committee. It doesn't appear to be meeting either until February. So, but we've found a lot of time for other stuff to do here. So I'm a little unclear as to how urgent our work is.
Point taken. I think you should be meeting before Christmas. 24th.
But we run out of Wednesdays.
Yeah. So up until Christmas, I think perhaps we do need to intensify things. I definitely think your committee should meet before Christmas, and probably corporate and services should meet before Christmas too. What's everyone's feeling on that?
Or at least a day that each committee gets half the day's agenda or something, just to get some things rolling here.
Yeah. Can you make that happen, Leanne?
So to enable that to happen, are you happy for me to liaise with yourselves about setting a date and time so that we can get that? The other thing is we need to advertise it so the public is aware.
Okay, so let's resolve that Leanne will talk to all the committee chairs individually and say, what is their feeling? Do they feel they need to get a committee meeting up and going before Christmas?
Well, I think that's fair enough, but I also think you as a chair are the ones that sort of, you know, help build the politics around this in terms of the idea about having one in the morning, one in the afternoon, try and find a consensus to how to make this thing work. I thought that would be an ideal thing, you know. and so if Tom wants 2 days because he's really busy, he wants to get on with it, well, you're in a position to say, Tom, well, that may be well, Tom, but I think I'm only going to give you half a day, whereas I think that's a conversation that Leanne would struggle to have. You with me?
Okay, let's revise that. The chair of the council and the chair of the committees will meet with Leanne and we will come up with a plan.
Beautiful.
Because I think that we should be meeting before Christmas. Any other comment on that? It's an addition. We don't need a motion on that. But we're just gonna, no. Okay, then the recommendation is as it is, with 1 to 8.
I'll move.
Move from Councillor Barker. Seconder?
I'll second that.
Seconder. All those in favour of the recommendation? Thanks. 9. Thank you very much. Now, 10 we are referring, I apologise to the public for that, but we're going to do 10 after we've done the HBRC report, which is going to be public as well. So we're moving to item 11, issues arising from local body election. Now, our CEO will deal with this paper.
With the assistance of the team around the table here, so we'll just take the items as they arise.
You just delegate to whoever.
Yeah, I'm going. Thanks, Jimmy. Okay, just bear with me. While I get to it.
61.
Okay, so the first item is public notification of water bottling consent. So, Ian, if you can address that issue, please.
Thank you, Chair. So fairly brief and to the point, we've had Simpson Grierson review recent case law with regards to special circumstances provision under the Resource Management Act. Expecting a draft opinion today, hopefully, from them. What I would propose is that we review that opinion and bring it to you at the meeting at the end of this month for discussion, and then from there you can consider whether that provides the relief you see being needed for this issue. If not, we can then move into a discussion of delegations and whether whether you wish to reconsider the delegations and bring them back to council. So we can set out a process by which we could do that in the same paper at the end of the month. So we could tag team the two. And then just the final comment there is that obviously the longer term discussion of this issue probably best sits in general policy for the region, whether that goes into the tank process or some other mechanism. But so effectively proposing a staged approach. So would welcome any comment on that.
Just for a point of clarification for some of the public present, Ian, could you just break that down in simple terms to what is different from what happens now? If you want to set up a water bottling plant right now.
So what we've asked Simpson Grierson to give us an opinion on is whether recent case law, which specifically considered public interest in controversy around particular issues, whether that changes the consideration or thinking in regards to special circumstances. So special circumstances is a provision in the Resource Management Act in the notification assessment by which if you've moved past an effects assessment and decided effects are no more than minor, special circumstances can pick up other considerations that are beyond an effects basis and consider those in terms of whether you choose to notify or not. Now, like I say, the recent case law suggests that the courts may have a view on that, and that's what we've asked Simpson Grierson to advise us of, so that we can consider whether the interest and controversy around this particular issue thereby triggers a special circumstances provision and requires notification. So that's the first step. The second step is if it doesn't and the opinion doesn't support that, i.e. the law doesn't support that, councillors have previously indicated a desire to bring the delegation for making the notification assessment back to this table. So we would set out a process by which you could do that, and you could agree or not and refine that and set that up. And or lastly, you can also direct or engage in the policy process to address this issue more substantively and more, I guess, permanently on a regional basis through a public policy process like you have running in the tank catchments at the moment. So it's effectively 3 steps, starting with what does the current law allow.
Okay. Comment and questions?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment, Chair. I hope the members of the public understood the explanation that Ian has just given. What's generated this is a huge amount of angst in this community, as everybody knows, about the fact that 9 water bottling consents involving something like 5 million cubic metres of water have been granted without any public notification of any of those consents. And the public, quite understandably, feels that they have a view about these matters and wish to express that view, but they're denied the opportunity to do so because none of the applications to date have been publicly notified. So we've raised this with the staff and said we need a better process which enables public input into this, and that's the process we're going through, is to find a mechanism within the Resource Management Act that enables us to do that. So that's the background to this whole thing. Now, interestingly enough, I attended a Resource Management Act refresher course earlier this week, along with several members of the staff from here, and this very matter of public notification on the basis of high levels of public interest was raised with the 2 commissioners, one of whom is a lawyer, who were running this course, and both of them instantly agree that high levels of public interest could invoke this special circumstances clause in the Resource Management Act, enabling these things to be notified. So I'm satisfied about the advice I got from there. I hope it concurs with the advice that you're seeking from some other lawyer, but let's wait until the 30th and then we can take this further.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions in regard to the paper, and the first one is in regard to public notification of water bottling consents, and I'm interested to know whether we're achieving full cost recovery for exported water. In particular, I'm referring to the public good elements of water management in the region, that is the general rate contribution that all ratepayers pay, but if you're a non-resident or you don't pay other rates, therefore you're avoiding, if you like, that component, the public good component from the general rate applied. Can you tell me whether we're recovering the full consequence of water management into the consent applications?
So we don't recover. I'll start from the beginning actually. We have a Section 36 program we run, zone-based science water charges, that recovers 35% of the costs of water management against water takes in the region and other consents actually. So we don't recover 100% of it. 2/3 of it falls to the general rate, 1/3 of it's recovered through the Section 36 charges, notwithstanding that these activities reside or exist on a property and that property is rated. So we recover a general rate from the property on which the operations occur, of which I think there are only two in the region operating at the moment.
Mr. Chair, following on, the question I've got then is there any opportunity to apply in any sense to an exported bottle of water the full cost that all ratepayers in Hawke's Bay pay for that water?
You have the potential to revise your Section 36 recovery policy and achieve something like that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what that might look like, but you could do that, but certainly not through any other mechanism I can think of.
Councillor, you'll recall when you were on council last time we went through the special consultative process the Section 36 charges, to introduce those. And the process for that's prescribed under the Local Government Act. Any amendment would have to go through a similar process, but I mean, it's not undoable, but it's something you could go through that process.
Is it possible to have a paper brought back to us that explores that very
Yes.
process?
Yep.
Yes, it is.
So just for clarification, this is particularly in regard to water bottling, no other activity?
Well, it occurs to me that all other consent holders are prejudiced because they pay the full consequence of water management, and yet those exporters who export the product potentially don't meet the same cost as other consent holders.
So that's not, I wouldn't agree that that's absolutely correct. Like I say, there's a property on which the bottling operations occur, and that will be rated.
I fully understand.
The ownership, I guess, is the element that you're discussing. Where there's foreign ownership, they may not be.
No, I think the simple answer, councillor, is yes, we can look at the Section 36 charging regime and for specific activities, etc., how that could be applied, right?
I think that would be a good start to that issue.
Rather than debating the ins and outs of that right now.
But,
With your
but
patience.
part of that debate, Mr Chairman, is the council going to adopt a policy of picking winners and losers? And that's a vital debate.
Yeah, we haven't decided that yet. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just think there's another, I think we should sort of try and state a policy position here rather than deal with it on an ad hoc basis. What I understand Councillor Curtin to be asking is that the people who use this process pay the full cost of meeting the process. Is that what he's saying? Rather than, so that do not, other parties of the rating system in Hawke's Bay are not making a contribution to this process. So if you're going to be involved in water bottling and exporting, then whatever the costs of the council's activities are associated with it, you are to meet the full cost of it. To go beyond that, we need to be clear, would be the council effectively raising a tax, and we are prescribed by law from raising taxes. So we're entitled to have the full cost of recovery. I think the paper should be looking at it more on a policy line rather than we just want to do this.
First, if I can comment, first and foremost, any analysis we do has to address the policy questions, number one. Then it needs to address the instruments through which charges are raised, whether Section 36 targeted rates or whatever. And there's plenty of history and plenty of current practice that differentiates charges according to activities and the benefit.
Could I just be clear too, through you, Chair, are you also interested in the consenting regime, or is it just the science costs?
I'm interested in full cost recovery.
Right.
So can I just...
No,
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Belford first.
I'm on the cost. So how much money are we talking about on each of these consents? What like is it like $500 per consent or something for the?
It'll depend on whether it's a change of conditions. If it's a change of conditions from an existing take to a new purpose, then it'll be a relatively minor take, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the cost of that is. If it's a new consent, it could be in the order of several $1,000s plus their assessment of effects. So there'll be some costs that we'll levy on them, and there'll be some costs of the applicant.
And that's a one-off cost to grant the consent.
Correct.
And then you've got an annual
Monitoring charges.
monitoring charge, which is what, $500 or something?
Again, off the top of my head, there'll be potential low flow charges, there'll be water information service charges, there'll be compliance costs. I don't know what those costs are off the top of my head. I can bring those back.
But they're currently subsidised through the general rate by what, 30%?
65.
65%. So if it's currently costing a water consent holder, I don't know, $500, rings bells in my head for some reason, then it might end up being $1,400 or $1,500. So there are 9 consents we're talking about. So we're talking about peanuts here, and it's just not worth spending a lot of time on, in my view.
$500 is right. We'll move off. Councillor Balfour, you had
Just in terms of dealing with expectations about where this process might or might not lead, if I can state my understanding, because I think there are folks in the audience who are pretty concerned about this. If our legal advice is that we have a reasonable basis for requiring public notification, what that means in turn simply is that a future consent, not any ones already given, might be publicly notified, or would be publicly notified, and at that point, anyone who has a concern about water bottling would still be required to come forward with an effects-based argument that that particular consent was having a deleterious impact on the environment in some manner, presumably, let's say, on the aquifer recharge or something of that order. And that's the extent of it, so that it takes us down the path toward a more public ventilation of the issues and concerns that people would have, but public concern per se cannot become a reason for denying the consent at the end of the day, correct? People could be outraged about the proposition, but unless some immediate effect can be established in that process, the consent would still be granted. Is that a correct understanding? I just want people to think that what we're setting in motion here is something that's going to lead to a blanket moratorium on water bottling or something of that sort. That would require those additional steps that you also outlined, right?
Correct. So it's a very useful summary. Yes, in effect, if the special circumstances are triggered, the consent is notified, there would be the opportunity for members of the public to submit. The submission would still fit around an effects assessment. There'd need to be demonstration of effects that were more than minor. And the hearing, and I suggest Councillor Bevan might be busier than he envisaged, the hearing would consider those and make a decision, but it would still have to fit within the current law. That's why, in my advice to you, is that the more substantive discussion and the more permanent solution for this issue sits in policy, rather than trying to wedge a policy discussion into a consenting process, which has been, unfortunately, how this council's operated historically, and run into all sorts of problems. The best way to deal with these sort of substantive issues is to put it into a public policy process, first schedule, have the debate and discussion where it is can be about principles and positions rather than effects, and it will allow you to potentially prioritise the use of water across any area and determine what goes first and what comes last, so that where you come into competition for the resource, you've already established what activities or uses you want to see in preference to others. So so I'm suggesting it's kind of staged. It gets you part of the way, but it won't get you all of the way that I think you're looking to go.
Could I just add to that then that I think it would be useful to signal in some way to the public that the tank process, which is the one process that is underway at the moment that could lead to a series of allocation issues about water use on the Haratunga Plains, where most of this bottling is an issue, that discussion could lead to the desire of some parties to have a hierarchy of needs on some basis of water use, groundwater use in the region. And that's kind of been hinted at in the tank meetings, that we might get to that point at some stage. But I think for those who feel like there is a broader policy issue as to whether this is an appropriate use of water and under what circumstances or what have you, that it would be useful for us to make clear that is something that is on the agenda clearly of the tank process, and we will be getting to that issue sometime over the next year or so as the science work enables us to address it.
So, again, a really good suggestion, Councillor. Mr. Palmer might want to respond, but I'd just make one point really clear, just perhaps so the public understand that whilst these consents are processed and can are granted. There is nothing that prevents this council, in writing its policy, look to bring those consents back in to review them against the new policy. So we've done that in the tuki. So if you choose to change the policy position, it basically puts everything back in the middle for reconsideration. So they're not granted in perpetuity. There's no perpetual right to the water. It's a permit for a period of time. And if this council makes a new policy provision that resets or redirects the agenda, those consents can and will be fitted against the policy.
Just for the benefit of councillors that weren't at the Tank Group meeting on Friday and members of the public, the Tank Group on Friday last had a discussion about future demand scenarios for groundwater in Hawke's Bay, and during that discussion requested further work on water bottling, and so we commissioned a report on that yesterday, so that work is now underway. That will come back to the Tank Group, and just in terms of Councillor Belford's concerns about public awareness of that work, can I suggest that the media statement arising from this meeting summarising these issues that we're going through explicitly references the fact that the Tank Group has work underway and will be bringing that forward into the policy process.
I don't know if there's any further discussion on this. I think that's a very good resolution. I think, and for we have this is a step-by-step process. And as Councillor Belford has mentioned, there is high public interest in this and high public concern. It rightly should be handled in the tank process because that's where our community is represented, all of our community. So I'm very pleased that James said it's on that agenda, and we need to move this along and get a position in the fundamentals rather than working around the edges as we are forced to at the moment. Is there any more further?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple of questions in regard to... Sorry, Paul, you go.
Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, it's further, probably a process question about this particular section, public notification of water bottling consents, is I don't see there's any particular action noted that we should be considering. You've just received the report. You've got an action point in terms of coming back to us with the Simpson-Grierson opinion. So that's at least one action that we should be noting somewhere on the record. Is it Leanne? I'm not sure the process is Leanne.
Happy with that, Chair. Certainly bring that back. You've got a meeting towards the end of this month. We'll fit the advice against the next stage into a paper and bring that back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you. I've just got some questions in regard to the drilling for oil and gas commentary.
Sorry, can I do them?
Can we just
My suggestion, perhaps, Chair, is that we do them turn by turn in the order of the issues on the paper.
I just want to finish off this one
Yep.
first.
So we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
Yep.
We're doing the water bottling one at the moment, so have a discussion on that and we'll come to it one by one. So is there any more discussion on this, and is everyone happy with yes?
So is it possible to actually have a levy on per litre of the water for a specific use? As Councillor Bevan has advocated this in the past, and I think most Māori would agree with it. When you're not selling it, it's just say borrowing it, so we're just hiring the water to you.
I was going to say there was a trick in that question. Hireage of water. I don't think it requires an answer. No. Thank you for your... So if there's no more discussion around that, I'd like to move to the second item, issues that arose. Feedlots.
Hands of Ian again.
So feedlots, again through you, Chair, a lot of focus on this in the last few months. As the paper lays out, this is an activity that occurs over the winter, so we have the luxury of a little bit of time, if you like, to get organised around this. We've got a consultant working with us to go through and look at our policy and rule framework and to look at feedlot operations in this region, how they operate, with the view that what we're looking to develop is a, if you like, a decision support process by which these operators understand, in terms of their operations, how it fits into our policy and rule framework, what their obligations are, and then we're set up to engage with them and manage those policy and rule processes, which will be through a resource consenting process. So that work's underway at the moment. It started about a month ago, but is still occurring now. What I'm proposing is that I don't have any substantive detail to give you at the moment, but I would bring that back to you in the new year to explain it and lay it out for you. With the view that what we're looking to do is have this set up and in place quite clearly in terms of our expectations and our expectations back to the operators, well laid out in advance of next winter, with the view that they've resolved or dealt with their regulatory obligations, and then we are in actively monitoring compliance with those next winter. But again, I'll bring you back more substantive detail in a year, if you're happy with that.
We'll start with Fenton. And we'll come to
Thank you, Chair. Just number 9 there on the feedlots, the operators require resource consent. Is this particularly for point source discharge?
It's not all operators are going to need a resource consent. And again, there's kind of flexibility. There's great variability in their operations. So some are clearly a feedlot operator, some are running an intensive break feed operation. And our policy and rule framework, whilst clear in some elements, is unclear in others. So coming out of this, I expect that we may be recommending some tweaks or refinements of that to make it work better for us and for them. So there's more clarity around what their obligations are. So yeah, we're trying to work through systematically to figure out, well, what is it that they do and how do they operate, and where does it trigger the rule, policy and rule framework, and then what are their obligations at that point, and where it doesn't, whether there is a requirement for us to address any effects that might be coming out of that, because as you'll appreciate, there are some that would be a very fine judgment call as to whether they're a feedlot or a feed pad, or whether they're break feeding in some manner. And built into this discussion, we're also acutely aware that we don't want perverse outcomes. So it's reasonably common practice in this region, as it is with many others in New Zealand, that they bring livestock off the kind of steeper, moderate hill country into the flats over winter to protect the soils and the land in those hill country areas. We wouldn't want to see a situation where anything we did created a worse outcome than we've got now, i.e. they push their livestock back into the hill country and it creates erosion problems that don't exist now. So we're being very careful about how we look at this and how we set it up, because like I say, we want to ensure compliance with our current rules, and that's not negotiable, and there'll be a zero tolerance next winter around that. But we do not want to drive in something that we end up with an outcome we hadn't anticipated that's actually worse than we've got now.
So if I understand all that, what you're saying is that there's a lack of clarity to individual operators as to whether they do or don't require, under present circumstances, a consent. So there's lack of clarity about that. So when I review my extensive library of photographs of these feedlots, it's hard for me to tell, looking at the photographs, which ones might or might not require a consent, as would be any member of the public to make that judgment. It just looks like a pretty bad situation. Are you telling us that you have within your authority, under the existing RMA or whatever, once you've done some more sorting, you would have the authority needed to put more conditions or be more, I'm not sure what the right word is, more demanding in terms of there being consents required, and conditions on them being fairly rigorous, that you have that within your authority today?
Yeah, yes, I do. And what I'm telling you is what I'll be telling them, and we have been conveying to them is that there is going to be some grey areas in the middle. And what I'm prepared to do is there'll be a judgment required in that, and that's why we want to set up this decision support tool, which gives clarity on our expectations to them and them going through some logical steps to know what their requirements are, and whilst doing that, avoiding perverse outcomes. But if there are grey areas that we think we're in the right space on, I'm happy to see that tested in court.
Two questions then. How many feedlots are we talking about, and are you getting reasonable levels of cooperation from the farmers who are involved in this?
So there's about a dozen that we're aware of, but like I say, what that kind of assessment doesn't include is people who might be intensively break feeding. So we haven't got a good regional coverage of knowing how much or how many individuals are in that space. So it's a reasonably sort of, the ones that we see that are obviously a feed pad or a feedlot operation. In terms of engagement, yes, very good. In fact, they're all very, very keen to engage with us. They want to know what our expectations are, and we'll give that to them clearly, and then they know, here's the bar, it needs to be met next winter.
Thank you, and just to follow on from Councillor Bevan, I don't know how you do a stock take because I'm aware of more than a dozen feedlots throughout Hawke's Bay. But I'd just like you to articulate, there has been very strong engagement, and the finger's been pointed to my neck of the woods, so I'm going to take up the mantle from there. There has been very strong engagement from feedlot owners with regional council to date. It's not like there's a whole lot of non-compliance. That's correct, isn't it?
It's been variable. It's certainly very, very good in the Tuki catchment, simply because that's where the focus is with the new policy. Yes, we're aware that there are other operations regionally, and that's part of the exercise, is to go and find out, well, where are they and what are they doing. But certainly in the Tuki catchment, it has been very, very good engagement and good discussion, particularly knowing that they're contributors of sediment and phosphorus in some areas. Look, the problem has been that there has been, if you like, conflicting views around what's required. That's why we want to lay them out very, very clearly and have it absolutely crystal clear, so the expectations are laid out, and then there's a not negotiable position for next winter. And if we identify people that we don't know now who aren't meeting the requirements in the future, well, that kind of zero tolerance approach would apply to them as well. So we'll be looking to engage extensively through the primary sector networks to make sure that we engage with people as best as practicable, and the people who are doing this are aware of our requirements in advance of next winter.
Yeah, because my experience is that they are expensive operations to set up, and the farmers I'm working with are not knowingly being non-compliant. They have huge ambitions to be protecting the environment. So I'm pleased that you said that they're working with you.
A question. I thought you were.
And this applies to both the feedlots I've seen alongside or adjacent to the Tuki as well as the Narrowero River. Is it conceivable that we would come to a point where there are sites that are simply deemed inappropriate for these feedlots, that are sitting on old riverbeds and next to streams that clearly are feeding into rivers and so forth?
So one of the big issue for these people to manage is water, managing runoff across the operations. That's one of the key focuses in the early discussion we've had with the consultant. It's the issue they deal with in the South Island. It'll be the issue we deal with here. How do you manage water? Typically, these operations may not necessarily be hard standard, but may be on areas of soil that are actually quite compacted because they have a lot of stock activity on them. So infiltration is quite low, but the problem is that they have runoff when it rains that has to be captured, managed, and then put back onto the land rather than ending up in the river. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking at. Well, how do you do that? What's a process by which, or a mechanism by which they can do that effectively, so that sediment and pathogen-laden water isn't entering surface water. So the focus has been very much on surface water. There are some operations that are consented that have piezometers already looking at groundwater, and to date, nothing showing any results that has us significantly concerned about groundwater. Again, because it appears that the way they operate doesn't result in large amounts of water going straight to groundwater. It's mainly dealing with the runoff across the surface, which you'll appreciate is challenging when they're operating in the winter and they're looking to store and then dispose of that.
My concern about this discussion is that we're talking about different things like feedlots, and feedlots means a different thing to somebody else, a different structure. And I'm worried that we're going to get tied up in names. But what I am concerned about is the effects. And I don't care what name you call it, it's the effects which is important. And what I'm also concerned to be is for this council, the councillors to have visibility on this. Now, the way this is written at the moment, it looks like it's staff, and I see staff and staff and staff all the way through it. What I want to know is in 8, when you say it's proposed the details of this work be brought back to council New Year once guidance material is available, is this before staff have told people what they're going to do, or is this after? Because I want to know, if something's going to be said to these operators about effects and so on, I want to know what view the councils have of it. So it's after. If we're told after, well, I'm making a point, I don't think that's satisfactory. If there's going to be a discussion with people on these issues, I want to be assured that the effects are well identified, the effects are well mitigated, and I'm less fussed about what you call it, but I want council to have visibility of it before it goes to the operators. That's my question, and I don't see that there.
So you're correct, Councillor, it wasn't proposed to do that, and I guess it's in the timing. What we're trying to do is pull this together in a timely manner to provide them well in advance of next winter, so that they can address the issues that this process raises for them and have them in place prior to winter 2017. So it wasn't proposed, but it can be. We can build that into it in terms of bringing it back to a council meeting for you to consider before we engage with the operators.
Well, it's a council meeting later on this month. There's another one in December. That's 2 council meetings you can come back to us for. There's plenty before December, as I would see it, before winter. And again, I just make my point. I want councillors to be sure. I want the staff to come back and tell us that they've identified all of the issues. They've identified all of the effects, and they have an appropriate mitigating strategy, and you to convince councillors that that's okay. And once we've done that, I'm happy for you to move. But I want to hear it first. I don't want to be on the conversation chain.
That's not a problem. We can do that. Are there any other comments or questions around this before we move on? Because I want to make a comment as well. And I've heard your report, and thank you very much for that. It's clear that some farmers are doing feedlots. First of all, I'm interested that it's only in the winter because to me it's about cheap grain prices and high beef prices. But I'll just take that as that I was wrong there. But there's a lot. I saw the photographs. I saw how close these were to the river during that heavy rain. A lot of the public saw them. So there's a lot of suspicion about feedlots. I mean, it'll be absolutely true that some farmers will be doing a beautiful job, as Debbie pointed out. But it's also true that some farmers have just all of a sudden decided that because of the economic structure, the grain price and the beef price, that they just, and you alluded to that, jammed their stock into a paddock and away they went and called it a feedlot. Well, it's not. And the public is really concerned about what happened after that big rain and looking at the photos was a disgrace. So we do want to be proactive on this. We do want, if we're going to have feedlots, that they are properly constructed and they're properly dealing with the waste. And I think we need to be very clear on that when we go forward on this. And so if we can have that, and councillors do want to be involved because they're getting the constituents that will be in their ear about it already and will be in the future in their ear about it. We don't want random feedlots popping up like all of a sudden they did and none of us knew about it. So I just make that as a closing statement. Moratorium on drilling for oil, gas and within the region's aquifers.
And this goes to James, if you can this one, thanks. Right. Thank you, Chair. So during the last triennium, the Council took a great interest in oil and gas drilling matters, and advice was provided on a number of occasions about the regulation of that. As it currently stands under the Regional Resource Management Plan, individuals or organisations can apply to drill for oil and gas throughout the region, and a resource consent, a bundle of resource consents typically needs to be considered. If one of those was lodged for drilling into one or more of the region's aquifers, then the effects of that and the risk management of those effects would need to be taken into account. There's no guarantee that those consents would be issued, but equally there's no guarantee that there would be grounds to deny the consents under the existing rules. And so there has been some concern within the community for some time about the potential effects on the aquifers, particularly as they're valued for their public drinking supply. So we have noted that the advice provided to the previous council that the most cost-effective way of addressing this issue was doing it through the freshwater plan changes, such as the tank plan change, where all of the issues around water management, both surface and ground, and activities that may have an effect on those water bodies would be duly considered and rules proposed, and they would be added to the Regional Resource Management Plan over time. Despite that advice, and also the advice that there's no current appetite for drilling within the region given the downturn in the oil and gas sector, there remains some desire within the community and potentially among some councillors to consider a prohibition ahead of those freshwater plan change processes. So we've set out in the paper the options available to the council to progress this. It would require a plan change to the RRMP, and there are a number of process steps that need to be undertaken. Staff have heard in relation to the concerns around the aquifer, also desires to see a prohibition on the region's water bodies, and that includes lakes, rivers and estuaries. And we have also heard concerns about a prohibition needing to be put in place in relation to the recharge zones of aquifers and even into catchments. The point I'd make on that is that everywhere in the bay is a catchment of some sort, so you'd be talking with respect to catchments a region-wide prohibition, and to justify that under the Resource Management Act and get it through would be challenging to say the least, and in my view would be certainly contentious and contested, possibly by central government and certainly by the oil and gas sector. However, there has not been any resistance to the exclusion of the Heritonga and Ruataniwha aquifers from block offers by central government when they have undertaken those. So they've excluded those areas specifically because of community concern about the potential effect on the aquifers, and the industry's been reasonably comfortable about that. In between the aquifers and all catchments you have, surface water bodies, and a view of staff is that it may be possible to justify under the RMA a prohibition on the drilling of oil and gas in lakes, rivers and aquifers, as well as estuaries as well as aquifers. So there was funding set aside in the long-term plan to undertake a plan change of this nature. It has not been fully spent, so $200,000 was borrowed under the last LTP to undertake work on this. Some of that, approximately $55,000, has been spent to date on the procurement of expert advice for the advice that went to the previous council in the previous triennium. So $145,000 remains. If the council is of a mind to press on and pursue a prohibition on the aquifers and potentially surface water bodies, then resources are available. We probably don't have internal staff capacity at the moment, given everything else on, so we would be largely contracting in resource to support a plan change, and it's likely to take 6 to 9 months. The alternative with respect to the Hiratonga aquifer is to leave the issue with the tank group and wait till they come back with a recommended plan change at the end of 2017 and pursue it by way of that notified plan change after that time. Whichever course of action is pursued, this is a matter for the Regional Planning Committee, as it is a planning matter under the Act. And therefore our recommendation is that any further action on this be referred to the RPC on its meeting on the 23rd of November.
Thank you.
Start with thanks, Mr. Chair. And waiting to 217 for a tank is probably not my preferred option, but Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify there are a couple of terms in the paper, particularly at paragraph 12, 13 and 14, and I referred to a phrase, regions productive aquifers, at paragraph 12. We then have regionally significant groundwater resources at 13, and then there's reference to that to catchments or aquifer recharge zones as well. To me, there's a little lack of clarity around what those terms mean. But in addition, I wonder whether you could comment, is there a specific terminology that we can adopt? And two, given a lack of knowledge, if for example, we chose the term regions productive aquifer, or even one's probably more beneficial, significant groundwater resource, given that we don't know the extent of them, what's the situation with declaring a zone associated and a surrounding? I appreciate the comments on aquifer recharge zone, etc., but how can we ensure that we give sufficient scope in any prohibited area to ensure we don't in fact impact on the aquifer?
So through you, Chair, I can suggest that we do actually know the extent of the aquifers, so that's part of the modelling work that we've been doing in Hiratonga. We've delineated the Hiratonga groundwater resource boundary as we did with the Ruataniwha. So we do know...
Your well drillers would challenge that?
Sorry?
Some of your well drillers would challenge that?
It depends on where you... what you're talking about is the area of recharge, i.e. where does the water come from?
No, the aquifer itself. Okay,
well, based on our science work to date, we have put a boundary around the aquifers, and they're also they're in a schedule in the resource management plan. I can't recall which schedule it is now, but there is a schedule that gives you a boundary for them, and we've refined that recently in the work we've been doing for the modelling.
Can I ask the question? The depth of those, the science you do have, is limited to my recall is something like 120 odd metres, when in fact the aquifer is likely to be much deeper than that. So,
no.
Yes.
No. So we've got geological records from bores that go. I think the deepest one is about 1,500 metres, which there are several oil and gas exploration wells across the Hiratonga Plains now, and we have the information from those logs. So we've built with GNS Science, they've built a geologic model, if you like, so understanding the base geology and then the shape and configuration of the layers above it that form the aquifer. So that's work that was done 2 years ago now, using all of the available bore records we've got, which are reasonably extensive, some further seismic work that's been done as part of the oil and gas exploration across the region. So that's gone into building the aquifer. So we have a good understanding of the shape and the base layers. The question or the challenge is what's in the base layer, what's in the limestone at the base, and is it an area of aquifer? This is the point that people like Russell Bayliss would make, as he sees that being part of the aquifer rather than the gravels above it or an association with the gravels above it. So we do know the extent of that geologically, and we've mapped that. The question is, Russell's view is the limestone forms part of it, and our view is that the gravel above it does. That's the point of difference.
So
Anyway, I don't think we want to get into a big debate on the aquifer right now.
Mr Chairman, the previous council did decide that it would enter into a program of deep drilling, but for resource reasons, we weren't able to do that until, I think it's the year after next. But it has made a policy commitment to do some further deep bore exploratory drilling to determine those matters that may be still in some contention.
Any other questions directly related to this issue on this paper? Peter Bevan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just going back to the summary you gave, if I understand it correctly, the choices are here to do a limited plan change, which would take 6 to 9 months, so it could be operative by, I don't know, June, July next year, or wait for the tank process to make a recommendation, which would then become part of a plan change, and they will report to this council late 2017. So once we get to that point, it might take another, year or maybe more for the plan change actually to become operative, that falls out of the tank process?
Yes, although at the point of notification, any prohibited activity becomes actually discretionary activity under law. So although given that these activities are discretionary activities by and large, except for the bore permit itself, but all the other activities associated are discretionary, there's not really any material effect. But the notified plan would be taken into consideration during the period of notification through to going operative.
Right, so what you're saying is that by the end of 2017, once the tank process is complete and the recommendation comes before us, we'll have some extra measures of protection available to us at that point.
Yeah, and the important point is that tank is looking at the Heritonga zone, and so this would not be region-wide, although one option is to use that plan change for some region-wide provisions. However, that would be a deviation from the current intention for the tank plan change, just to focus on the Heritonga zone.
But in any event, we're saying a decision on which of these options we'd want to pursue needs to be thrashed out in the RPC, so we can have our opinions here today about this, but it's kind of a premature discussion. But since there'll be fewer people in attendance at the RPC meeting, I suspect, I'd just like to indicate that I'm what I would call a patient hawk on this issue. The hawk part is that I don't think we as a region have any business buying into continuation of an oil economy, period. So I don't care whether the drilling is in my backyard or in the middle of the Heritonga aquifer. That's my view. But I also don't see the need to spend the extra money because practically I'd be perfectly happy to see this move through the tank process as part of a holistic answer to water usage in the region. And I don't sense that there's any great urgency to the oil industry descending upon us in the next 24 months. So I don't, to me, separating this out and treating it separately from a package of issues and spending the extra money to do all that in the face of a non-urgent situation, just seems crazy. But I have a more fundamental objection to pursuing this oil and gas drilling. And as I say, I'll be advocating that because I think that's where my constituency is.
I want to take the chairman's right, and I want to agree with Tom's position on that. I have a fundamental position on this, on oil and gas drilling in Hawke's Bay, period. But especially in areas concerning our aquifer. But as James pointed out, the tributaries to our aquifer, you're practically all of Hawke's Bay anyway, because you're including all the hill countries, that all the drains and creeks and et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my position as well. I'm really happy to take it to the RPC. I think that's where it rightly should be debated. So if we can bring it, but I will be sending a signal that I will be debating this with them on the fundamental principle. We do not do this in Hawke's Bay. We grow things in Hawke's Bay, and it doesn't include oil. So that's the end of that. Oh,
I move the recommendation.
yes, thank you. We have a
Can I second that?
and a seconder. All those in favour of the recommendation? Oh no, we have some additions, don't we? We have 4 and 5. We have some. We did have some additions, guys. Yeah, there was. See if we can get them up on the board.
And also those costs, I'll bring the costs, so
Yeah.
bring it back in November with more detail, as well as the costs that Councillor Curtin raised. I might grab him at lunchtime just to clarify that.
Question on the feedlots, I asked for the matter to come back to council. Should that be in the resolution as well? It's not in here yet, but I think it should do. But in case of the
Ca-
oil and gas, we're going to have treble discussion.
Just, Councillor, if I could just chair through you, just the order of timeliness, as long as we do get an Environment Services Committee meeting before February next year, otherwise that's not going to work for me. Sorry, we won't get this done in time.
Well, you can always call special meetings.
Sorry, Chair, can I speak to that motion? Yeah, just a few quick words. Whilst the issue of fracking has gone off the boil of late, I recognise that this is mainly due to a drop in oil prices. Tauranga Oil did not pick up sticks and exit Hawke's Bay out of the goodness of their hearts. This has given us time to deal with this issue in an orderly fashion, to put our house in order so that everyone knows the rules. That's why I'm pleased to support advancing the process to place a moratorium on the oil and gas development to protect our region's aquifers. It is encouraging to note that staff do not feel that this will be a particularly controversial decision for the most part, although I'd note that unless we protect the recharge areas of our aquifers, there is no point in protecting the aquifers themselves. I think this is one of the lessons we can take away from Havelock North, that we really don't know enough about what happens underground to be 100% confident that our aquifers are safe from contamination, either from a close source or from a more distant source, requesting the Regional Planning Committee to consider proposing a plan change to the Regional Resource Management Plan is to me the right step at present. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair, and in moving the recommendation, it's interesting that the two new green newbies, have moved and seconded the motion. Mr. Chair, I'm really not. I am concerned that we delay consideration of the oil and gas exploration in aid of our aquifers, and I'd much prefer to see that issue dealt with very, very expediently. But also the other issues in the paper are of concern, and that's why they've arisen in this fashion to this meeting. In regard to the water bottling consents, I potentially disagree that the recovery of all full cost recovery is of no consequence. I think that at the very least we need to be ensuring that bottles of water that get put into a container and sent overseas and by way of subsidy paid for by the rest of the residents in Hawke's Bay and ratepayers, we owe it to those ratepayers to ensure equity in that regard. So that's why I'd be very keen to see at least an equitable situation arise there. I'd much prefer to go further and impose what clearly is a major potential revenue source for the region that could fund a great deal more research into our water resources. Call it a tax, call it what you like, but get the money in one way or the other. So I'm pleased that we're able to move relatively quickly on the recommendations to get information back, and particularly around the oil and gas exploration. We need to have to move that along with some great alacrity on that.
Just very quickly, Chair, just a very bald reminder to my colleagues that there are still issues north of Tongoyo and south of Peka Peka. So these aren't the only issues that arose out of the election, and we're looking for council support on a range of other issues going forward.
I'd like to assure Councillor and I have been doing a lot of business in Wairau in the last 2 weeks, on Wairau, but not oil and gas. Any other speakers? Otherwise, okay, thank you very much. We'll move those motions. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. We have 10 minutes. It's not